At my baby shower, I stood in front of my family and friends, excited and nervous, holding a plate of snacks and trying to enjoy the moment. Everyone was smiling, talking, and waiting for my husband to arrive. I thought he would walk in with flowers or maybe a small gift for the baby. Instead, he stepped inside with a cold look on his face and a manila envelope in his hand. He didn't greet me. He didn't touch my belly. He didn't smile at anyone. He walked straight toward me, stopped right in front of the table, and placed the envelope down like it was nothing important. Then he said, in a flat voice, "You need to look at this." I opened the envelope, confused, thinking maybe he printed something for the baby shower games. But inside were divorce papers, already filled out, already signed by him. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped them. The room went silent. I could feel everyone watching. My family froze. My friends stared at me with wide eyes. Even my aunt stopped mid-sentence. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. Then he said something even worse, "The baby isn't mine." I felt the air leave my lungs. I couldn't speak at first. I looked at him, trying to understand how the man I married could choose this moment, this day, to hurt me like that. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't as lost as he thought. I already had something to say, something that would change everything for him. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. For a long time, I truly believed my home life was solid. I thought I had chosen a partner who understood me, someone who wanted the same quiet, steady future I dreamed about. I worked hard to build routines that felt safe, morning coffee together, evening walks after dinner, small plans for the weekend. Those moments made me feel like we were moving towards something real. Grant always appeared patient. He kept his tone even, never raised his voice, and acted as though he cared about our shared goals. When we talked about growing our family, he listened and nodded, telling me we were on the same path. I trusted that. I trusted him. Every doctor visit, every hopeful month, every disappointment, we went through them side by side. Or at least that's what I let myself believe. I thought his quiet nature came from being thoughtful. I thought his long silences meant he was processing things the way some people do when life becomes heavy. I never imagined they could hide something entirely different. I held on to the idea that we were building a strong foundation, even when the effort felt uneven. There were nights when I lay awake, imagining our future home filled with laughter. I pictured Grant holding a child with gentle hands, proud and grateful. Those hopes kept me steady, even when the emotional weight of waiting felt too heavy to name. Looking back, I realize how much trust one placed in small gestures, his hand on my shoulder, a soft promise, a quiet nod. I told myself those signs were proof of commitment. I never questioned them. I never questioned him. I thought I was living in a life built on honesty. But what I saw as stability was only a surface he allowed me to see. As the months passed, I started noticing small changes that didn't fit the man I thought I knew. He came home later and later, often slipping through the door long after I had already prepared dinner. When I asked how his day went, he would give short answers, never offering details, almost as if he wanted the conversation to end quickly. Another shift crept in quietly. He kept his phone close to him at all times. Before, he would leave it on the counter or forget it on the couch. Now it was always in his pocket or upside down beside him. The moment it lit up, he would reach for it before I could even glance in its direction. When I walked into the room unexpectedly, he would lock the screen with a speed that made my stomach twist. I noticed, too, how he avoided the moments that should have brought us closer. Every time I mentioned a checkup or asked if he wanted to join me, he found a reason to stay behind. Meetings, errands, deadlines, each excuse sounded like something he grabbed at the last second. I tried to push down the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept telling myself he was overwhelmed or tired, that the upcoming changes were weighing on him. At night, I would lie in bed and listen to him shower long after midnight, the water running as if he needed to rinse off a day he didn't want to talk about. When he slipped into bed, he stayed on the far edge, barely touching the sheets near me. I tried to hold on to patience. I tried to believe everything would settle. But deep down, a quiet voice was growing louder, telling me that the man beside me was not the same person he had been before. The day of the gathering started quietly, with sunlight slipping through the curtains in soft streaks. I woke up earlier than usual, wanting everything to look warm and welcoming. My friends arrived soon after breakfast, carrying boxes, ribbons, and little bags filled with items they refused to let me peek inside. They moved through the rooms with easy energy, talking and laughing as they unpacked decorations. Kara arranged the living area with careful hands, placing small touches that made the space feel gentle and calm. Blythe worked near the windows, hanging pieces she had made herself, each one chosen to bring a sense of peace. Nora guided me to sit and rest, reminding me that they had everything under control. I watched them transform the house, turning it into a place that felt comforting, almost like a fresh start. The colors they used made the whole room glow. Nothing felt loud or overwhelming. The atmosphere was soft, almost soothing, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a small lift inside my chest. Their effort wasn't just about a celebration, it felt like they wanted to rebuild something I had slowly been losing. As they worked, I found myself imagining how the afternoon might unfold. I pictured a quiet moment where he would walk in, set aside whatever had been weighing on him, and stand beside me the way he once did. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe the distance could fade, that he might show a hint of the man he used to be. That thought settled over me like a fragile hope, something I held on to even though I didn't know if it was safe to trust it. For a few hours, surrounded by the people who cared for me, I let myself feel lighter. Guests were already settling in when I heard the front door open. The sound was sharp, cutting through the soft chatter in the room. I turned, expecting a warm entrance, maybe even a quick smile. Instead, he stepped inside with a stiff posture, as if he wished he were anywhere else. His clothes looked freshly pressed, far more formal than needed, and a strong scent followed him, one I had never recognized on him before. It wasn't the kind he usually wore, and something about it made my stomach tighten. He kept his gaze low, scanning everything except me. People murmured greetings, but he barely nodded. Not once did he look in my direction. It felt as if a wall had formed between us the moment he crossed the threshold. I waited for him to come closer, maybe place a hand on me the way partners often do without thinking, but he walked past as though I wasn't standing there. His steps were quick, almost impatient. He moved straight toward the table where the food was arranged, his expression flat, giving nothing away. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. He placed it on the surface with a firm motion, as though he wanted everyone to notice. A few guests paused mid-conversation, watching him with confusion. I felt a wave of heat rise in my chest, not understanding why he would bring something like that into a moment meant to be gentle and supportive. He didn't speak. He didn't acknowledge the effort around him. He simply stood there for a breath, then stepped aside as if his presence held no meaning. The distance in his behavior hung heavy in the air, turning what should have been a joyful gathering into something strangely cold. He stood beside the table for only a moment before turning toward me with an expression that made my breath hitch. People around us slowly quieted, sensing something uneasy in the air. He finally lifted his head, but the look he gave me was sharp, almost detached, as if he were speaking to a stranger. Conversations faded, one by one, until the entire room felt still. Then he spoke in a clipped tone that carried across the space. His words dropped like heavy stones, cold and direct, leaving no hint of hesitation. My friends froze where they stood. A few relatives glanced at each other, unsure they had heard him correctly. I felt my heart stumble inside my chest, but I forced myself to reach for the envelope resting on the table. My fingers trembled as I slid the papers out. The edges scratched lightly against my skin, grounding me in a moment that hardly felt real. I scanned the pages, my eyes catching names, dates, and signatures arranged in neat lines. The reality of what I was holding settled in slowly, like ice spreading through my veins. Every detail had been prepared in advance, organized so cleanly it was clear he had planned this long before he walked through the door. The air felt heavy, almost thick, pressing against my ribs. No one spoke. No one even shifted. It was as if the gathering had turned into a frozen picture, every person caught between disbelief and discomfort. I could feel their eyes on me, some filled with worry, others stunned, all of them waiting for me to react. My throat tightened, but I stayed still, gripping the papers as his actions replayed in my mind. In that silent room, surrounded by people who had come to celebrate new life, I realized everything I thought was stable had shattered in an instant. That evening, after everyone left and the house finally went quiet, I sat alone on the edge of the couch. My hands still felt shaky, but my thoughts were sharper than they had been all day. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to start. I reached for my laptop, opened it slowly, and signed into the accounts we both used. My breathing grew uneven as the numbers loaded on the screen. Something was wrong. Balances that should have been steady showed clear dips, like pieces pulled out one by one. I clicked through the history, my eyes tracing the entries. Each withdrawal had been made on days when he said he had unexpected extra hours or urgent work he couldn't avoid. The amounts weren't random. They formed a clear sequence, spaced almost evenly apart, as if someone had a schedule. My stomach tightened as I scrolled further. The pattern kept repeating, stretching back longer than I wanted to admit. I tried to remember every time he came home unusually tired, every weekend he claimed he had to handle things at the office. Looking at the numbers now, those explanations felt hollow. I dug deeper, opening statements from the months before. More gaps appeared, each one leading to the same sinking feeling. The trust one once depended on felt like sand slipping through my fingers. This wasn't a simple mistake or oversight. There was intention behind it, something planned, something hidden. The room around me felt colder. I pulled my sweater tighter, but it didn't help. I wasn't just dealing with emotional hurt anymore. This was calculated, deliberate, and far more unsettling than I expected. As I stared at the screen, a single truth settled heavy in my chest: whatever was happening was far bigger than a bad day or distant behavior. Something far more serious had been moving beneath the surface. I knew I couldn't make sense of everything on my own. The more I stared at the financial records, the more overwhelming they felt. I needed someone who understood how to read between the lines, someone who could help me see what I was missing. After sitting in silence for a long moment, I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't spoken to in years. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was steady, familiar in a way that eased the tightness in my chest. I explained only the basics at first, unsure how much to share, but he didn't hesitate. He told me he could take a look and asked me to send everything I had. I forwarded the documents, every screenshot, every note, every detail I had gathered. Within an hour, he called back. His tone had changed, firmer, more serious. He told me the withdrawals weren't random at all. They followed routes that someone with experience in hiding funds would use, moving into places that didn't immediately raise suspicion. He traced each path carefully, step by step, until a name surfaced. When he said it, I felt my breath catch. It wasn't a company or a loan payment. It was a person. A woman I had never heard of. He kept explaining, pointing out how consistent the transfers were, how they lined up with days when Grant claimed he was swamped with responsibilities. I listened without interrupting, gripping the phone so tightly my fingers tingled. The more he uncovered, the clearer the picture became. The connection wasn't new, and it wasn't accidental. It stretched back many months, forming a timeline I had never suspected existed. By the time he finished, I realized the betrayal I thought I understood was only the surface of something much deeper. When my friend finished laying out the trail, I sat perfectly still, trying to absorb what he had just uncovered. At first, my mind refused to process it. I stared at the notes he sent, reading the same lines over and over, hoping I was misunderstanding something. But the truth was right there in plain view, woven into every transfer and every date he traced. He told me the woman wasn't just connected to the money. She had her own life-changing news, something that shifted everything I thought I knew. As he explained it, a strange numbness spread through me, as if my senses were shutting down one at a time. I could hear his voice, but it felt far away. The more details he shared, the clearer the picture became. Grant hadn't been drifting by accident. He hadn't pulled away because of stress or fear. He had been building an exit, piece by piece, while I spent months thinking we were preparing for a future together. Every unexplained late night, every guarded screen, every cold moment suddenly made sense, forming a truth I never imagined I would face. He had created another life behind my back, one he was getting ready to step into fully. The financial trail showed careful planning, like someone making sure they had a comfortable landing once they walked away from their current world. All the missing pieces began to align in a way that made my stomach twist. And then another realization hit me with sharp force. His harsh words earlier that day weren't a sudden outburst. They weren't confusion or doubt. They were meant to push me aside cleanly, so he could move on without guilt. He wanted to rewrite the story to make himself look justified. Sitting there in the dim living room, I understood his betrayal was far deeper than anything I had imagined. When my friend finished laying out the trail, I sat perfectly still, trying to absorb what he had just uncovered. At first, my mind refused to process it. I stared at the notes he sent, reading the same lines over and over, hoping I was misunderstanding something. But the truth was right there in plain view, woven into every transfer and every date he traced. He told me the woman wasn't just connected to the money. She had her own life-changing news, something that shifted everything I thought I knew. As he explained it, a strange numbness spread through me, as if my senses were shutting down one at a time. I could hear his voice, but it felt far away. The more details he shared, the clearer the picture became. Grant hadn't been drifting by accident. He hadn't pulled away because of stress or fear. He had been building an exit, piece by piece, while I spent months thinking we were preparing for a future together. Every unexplained late night, every guarded screen, every cold moment suddenly made sense, forming a truth I never imagined I would face. He had created another life behind my back, one he was getting ready to step into fully. The financial trail showed careful planning, like someone making sure they had a comfortable landing once they walked away from their current world. All the missing pieces began to align in a way that made my stomach twist. And then another realization hit me with sharp force. His harsh words earlier that day weren't a sudden outburst. They weren't confusion or doubt. They were meant to push me aside cleanly, so he could move on without guilt. He wanted to rewrite the story to make himself look justified. Sitting there in the dim living room, I understood his betrayal was far deeper than anything I had imagined. After letting the first revelation settle, I paused, letting the room absorb the tension before continuing. My gaze swept across the faces surrounding me, then returned to him. I spoke deliberately, each word measured, leaving no room for denial. I explained that I hadn't acted blindly, that every move I had made had been carefully documented and verified. I described how I had sought professional guidance, enlisting legal expertise to uncover the full extent of what had been hidden from me. Every transaction he thought was invisible had been traced. Every absence he assumed I wouldn't notice had been recorded. I outlined how these patterns exposed not only deception but also attempts to manipulate and undermine the life we were supposed to share. Then I revealed the steps I had taken. His access to joint finances was gone. Accounts he believed were untouched had been secured. Paperwork was filed in a way that ensured accountability, forcing the truth into the open. I could see his composure falter as he realized the depth of preparation I had undertaken. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The weight of the evidence spoke louder than any argument. I explained that legal action had begun, that what he had tried to hide would now be examined in full. The careful balance he had thought he controlled was gone, and there was nothing he could do to reverse it. The room was quiet, tense, filled with a mix of astonishment and disbelief. I let the silence linger, knowing he could feel the consequences of every choice he had made. In that moment, the power had shifted entirely, and I held the upper hand he never anticipated. He approached me later that evening, moving cautiously as if he could plead or negotiate a way out. His voice was low, strained, filled with urgency, but I stayed composed. Every word he tried to utter bounced off the walls between us, powerless against the momentum of what had already been set in motion. By then, the consequences he thought he could avoid had begun to surface. The woman at the center of his other life had learned the truth, everything he had tried to conceal had come to light. She confronted him, furious and betrayed, leaving him alone with no ally, no excuse. His carefully constructed plans crumbled in an instant, revealing a pattern of deception that couldn't be fixed. I watched as panic replaced the arrogance he had carried for so long. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored, and no one stood beside him to offer cover or protection. Each failure added weight, a relentless reminder that his actions were catching up. The legal repercussions were unavoidable. Authorities had all the information they needed to act, and the consequences of his theft and concealment were now inevitable. He stumbled through explanations, apologies, and justifications, but the room had already shifted. What he had assumed was temporary leverage turned out to be permanent exposure. Every misstep, every miscalculation, every secret he believed was safe was now visible, leaving him vulnerable in a way he had never experienced. By the time the night ended, his world had fractured. He was left with nothing but the reality of choices made in secrecy, choices that had destroyed trust, relationships, and a sense of control. I remained steady, holding my position, while everything he tried to command unraveled completely. The legal proceedings concluded quietly but decisively. Every document was signed according to my specifications, ensuring that my stability, security, and independence were protected. The house remained mine, a space filled with light and warmth, ready for the new life I had been preparing. Financial matters were settled in a way that left no room for dispute, guaranteeing that I could focus entirely on the future I wanted for myself and my child. In the weeks that followed, I immersed myself in preparation for the arrival of my son. Every detail mattered: his room, his clothes, the soft blankets that would welcome him into the world. The months of tension and betrayal were behind me, replaced by a sense of anticipation and quiet joy I hadn't known in a long time. I could feel the weight of past wrongs lifting, replaced by confidence in my own strength and judgment. When Rowan finally arrived, the moment was surreal. Holding him, feeling his tiny fingers curl around mine, I was filled with a profound sense of completion. It wasn't just the miracle of his birth, it was the realization that I had emerged from heartbreak and deceit stronger than I had ever imagined. The past no longer had a hold on me. Grant's absence was a silent echo throughout the room. He had attempted to control, manipulate, and betray, but none of it mattered anymore. I had taken every step carefully, reclaiming what he tried to take and building a life where I could thrive without fear or dependence. For the first time in years, I felt unshakable. My son's first cries were not just the beginning of his life, they were the affirmation of mine. I had created a future filled with security, love, and empowerment, standing fully independent, free from the shadow of someone who once tried to define me.